Je t'en ai, je compte de m'améliorer et je sens mes de grands du pauvre sur les pavés de l'amour.
You got to be on acid, honest mind, but not completely placid. Barely knew me, you know it's not about that. Find a new way, you know you're not surrounded. Mine won't lie, you know it's hard without you. Hoping that we hold to the horizon. Therapeutic to have no one to turn to. Tie the loose ends, you know I'm on your side too. No pasa nada, mantén la calma, se va a resolver esta semana.
To my youthful friend, goodbye, goodbye, like a seed in the wind. She's taking a root in the sky, see it flickering. Her system won't even try to deepen and ripen in the radioaction. Shall never return again. Polarize, polarize, the seasons will bend. There'll soon be proof that there is no alien, just a system of truth and lies. The reason, the language and the law of attraction. Just like a bad dream, you will disappear. Nothing back turns blue, near, all near. And I imagine you taking me out of here to deepen. Our love, it isn't even a fraction. Switch to another lens, the last sunlight. I don't need any other friends. The best kiss I ever had is the flickering of the water so clear and bright. To leap in my skin, I can feel the reaction. Just like a bad dream, you will disappear. And
Sorry. There are certain things that just don't roll off the tongue, and you gotta kind of try it. It's not my first language either, you know. It's like, okay. If we could please find our seats. Hi. We're gonna start very soon. If we could start quieting down a little bit. Shh. Oh, that works. Look at that. It works. Amazing. It's the second grade trick. All right. Cool. Good evening. Welcome to the Explorers Club Climate Week. I'm Alex Moore. I'm the chair of the program, and I'm only here for 30 seconds to, I keep getting drafted, I don't know why, to introduce Shai Vasserly. Shai and Jimmy Chin are the Academy Award-winning directors of Free Solo. Jimmy could not join us tonight, but we are very lucky to have Shai here, and so here's my pleasure to introduce Shai Vasserly.
I feel like I know many of you in this room, and so you know how I feel about being the consolation prize. So I'm so happy to be here, and Jimmy is so sorry not to be here. He's actually on expedition, or else he would have happily been here wholeheartedly. So it's my great honor to introduce, the Honnold Foundation. I have learned so much from Alex. I have become a better citizen of the world. I love Alex. And I think that I should tell, not in a sketchy way, maybe, that could be spicy. We could have a totally page 6, article. We could talk about how Chai and Alex love each other, but I would say he probably loves me too, in the best way. But I just thought I could share a little story about how Free Solo came to be. So for those of you who have not seen it, my directing partner and husband, his name is Jimmy Chin. He's a professional climber who's on expedition right now. And we have 2 children. We live in New York, or at least I say that we live in New York, and then he'll tell people live in Wyoming. And I was like, the kids they go to school in New York City. So just so we know how that is. But so Jimmy was like, you and Alex should get to know each other. There might be a film there. And so Alex came to stay with us. And I had a 1-year-old at the time. Her name is Marina. And there were some shenanigans that the evening before, which our nanny may have been horrified about, but not having to do with me, just having to do with Alex. And the next morning we had breakfast, and he told me, he was like, listen, I was like, I'm so happy to meet you. It's so nice to hang out. What do you have on your plate? What are you hoping to do? And he's like, listen, I was thinking about free soloing El Capitan in Yosemite. And I was like, that sounds amazing. what a great story. Like, maybe we should make a movie. I am not a climber. I grew up in Manhattan. I grew up a few blocks away. Alex, goes home to a van, and Jimmy's like, how did it go? Because I think Jimmy was like in Oman. He was like somewhere exotic. And I was like, it was amazing. Like, Alex has totally said that like he wants to free solo El Cap, and that's our next movie. And he's like, there's no fucking way. I'm like, why not? And he's like, you've got no clue. And I totally appreciate it. In this particular instance, I did have no clue, even though I have a clue in many, many other ways. And it's probably why the movie is pretty good, and you've seen it. But I can't say, like, how much I respect and admire Alex Honnold. I feel like sometimes I refer to him as my third child, which is not fair. But at the same time, I feel like we were making a film, and I witnessed him make some really difficult decisions with an open heart and great integrity, including saying, like, listen, I've met this woman, and she's important to me, so she's gonna move into the van while you've got like 15 people filming me. And I was like, great. This little sketch, and I remember having the conversation where it was like a girlfriend in a movie is a girlfriend for life. But here we are. My kids were flower children at Alex and Sonny's wedding, and I cannot tell you how much I respect and admire Alex and the work he's doing with the Honnold Foundation, because, it's the real deal. They take very little for the foundation itself. They're trying to empower the people. They really put they put a lot of research into in terms of like what charities to support and what efforts to support. And for me as a filmmaker and as a human, I'm just like, the point is put your money where your mouth is, right? Like walk the walk, not talk the talk. And Alex and his foundation do just that. And so I'm so happy you're here tonight, and I'm so happy that you can, listen to Alex and hear more about the foundation, listen to this wonderful conversation tonight. So thank you very much, and enjoy.
Can I use this mic? I'm not sure if I'm supposed to use the lectern, but I'd rather not. So, but I do need my clicker. Okay, thank you, Chai. I really appreciate that. That's maybe it's the warmest introduction I've had in probably ever, so that's nice. Okay, so this evening I'm going to show some images from a recent expedition to Alaska. And actually, I suppose the overall arc of this evening's entertainment, or sort of this program, is that I'm going to talk a little bit about a recent climbing trip, and which is going to be a National Geographic TV show eventually, once they turn it into a show. But in some ways, this represents one aspect of what I care about with climate and what I sort of do as a public-facing professional rock climber. And then we'll spend time after that seeing a film that my foundation has supported and hearing a little bit about the work that my foundation is working on, and meeting one of our partners, and we'll have a panel discussion after the film. So basically, bear with us, this is a totally new sort of program, and actually I just pulled together these random pictures from this trip this summer, because I was like, well, nobody's seen it yet, it's all, it's for National Geographic in like a year or two, and they put it in television. But for now, I figured it was a nice way to sort of tell this story. And then we'll talk about the work that the foundation is doing, which is kind of like the opposite side of the same coin. The same, me as a professional climber trying to do something useful in the world. This is the sort of mainstream television version, and then afterward we'll get into the real material, like the sort of meat and potatoes, the things that actually matter, where you're supporting projects on the ground that make a difference for human communities. Anyway, okay, so actually, for a little bit of background maybe, 2 years ago, I did a National Geographic TV show where we went and climbed a big wall in Guyana, and it doesn't totally matter, the story, but basically we were with a scientist, and on the trip he discovered something like 6 new species of frogs and lizards, and a new snake, and a new genus of frog. So it was this great scientific expedition for him, and the thing that I learned from the trip was that there are a lot of places in the world that I suppose I sort of naively thought that a lot of things had been figured out. And on that trip, I realized that there are a lot of places in the world that scientists just haven't really had access to. And it's really just a matter of getting to the place to do very basic science, that there's still a lot to be learned in huge swaths of our world. So I was like, oh, wow. All it took was to get this one old, I hate to call him an old man, but he was an 80-year-old scientist. So he turned 80 on the expedition. He managed to trek through the jungle, haul his frickin' carcass to the wall. It was super impressive. He made it. And with the month that we were in the jungle, he discovered these 6 new species. And I was like, that is amazing. So fast forward, I have the opportunity to do my own sort of TV expedition to eastern Greenland, which I did last summer. And that'll be on TV soon enough and whatever. Long story short, on that trip, we brought this French glaciologist who did a bunch of different science projects for universities scattered around the world, like core samples on rock walls for one university and like ice samples for a different. And we basically did this whole itinerary in eastern Greenland, 6 weeks of sort of adventure television, but with quite a bit of worthwhile science. I mean, nothing totally groundbreaking, but all things that these specific universities wouldn't be able to fund themselves, and all sort of interesting data points that help them build out their different climate models in respective ways. And so it's the kind of thing where you're like, yeah, this kind of science isn't changing the world, but if you're going to be doing a TV program, you may as well include things that are actually useful. And particularly with Greenland, the Greenland ice sheet, basically determines whether or not here on the second floor, like we would be underwater when the Greenland ice sheet melts, here in New York City. And so you're kind of like, this matters in terms of long-term climate. And so if you're going to be making a TV show, you may as well talk about things that actually matter. And so that brings me to this summer, where I had the opportunity to do sort of season 2 of the same show. And I know this is kind of absurd to be talking about 3 different seasons of different TV shows, whatever. Like this is the professional side of being a professional climber. It's like you get to go on cool climbing trips, but you also bring back some stories and share them. But so in this case, this Alaska expedition, nobody's seen any of this yet except for just a random couple pictures online. Who knows when they'll finish the film. But the short synopsis is that Tommy Caldwell, who's also a professional climber and well-known adventurer. Oh, wow, applause for Tommy. He's the man. Yeah, Tommy's incredible, and he was a childhood hero of mine and a really good friend. But so he was coming back from an Achilles injury. He ruptured his Achilles a year and a half ago, and he hasn't been on a big expedition in something like 10 years since he had kids, and so he was really chomping at the bit. He was like hungry to do something big, which in retrospect I should have seen as a red flag. So I was like, because as you just heard, I've been doing expeditions sort of nonstop for the last 10 years, and it turns out Tommy was really pent up, and so we had sort of different levels of hunger for this kind of a trip. But his vision was to bicycle from his home in Colorado to this peak, which is called the Devil's Thumb in southeastern Alaska. So something like a 2,000 or 2,400 mile bike ride, and then some sailing. He originally wanted to sea kayak it, which would have added several weeks to the trip, and we almost certainly would have died because neither of us know how to boat. I gave that a hard no because I was like, a 2-month trip is already enough. We don't need a 2.5-month trip just so we can sea kayak to this peak. But anyway, and then once we made it to Alaska, then it sort of became this another sort of episode of this National Geographic TV show that I've been doing. And so the whole journey into Alaska became an opportunity. So this peak is in the Tongass National Forest, which is the largest temperate rainforest in the world. So it's sort of a hub of biodiversity and sort of old-growth forest, but it's also been heavily logged. So it's an interesting story in so much as it's this incredible temperate rainforest with these incredible trees that's also been heavily logged and very threatened. So, and then there are indigenous people who have lived there for over 10,000 years and their way of life. And so it's like an interesting story around the people and the forest. And then there also happens to be this pretty impressive climbing destination right in the middle of it. So it makes for a good potential television show where you can highlight a important place ecologically, but also have some legitimate, real cool rock climbing. But so I'm going to run you through the TV portion of this trip briefly. The bike ride was just freaking 6 weeks of questing across the entire western U.S. We climbed a few things along the way, which was great. It was a big adventure. But I'm just showing pictures from the TV part just because this was heavily documented. There were like all kinds of professionals. As you can see, I certainly didn't take this picture on my iPhone. I'm not sure where it came from, but I was like, wow, that's a nice picture. Actually, for those that know, Renan Ozturk was the director for this particular show, and he is a consummate artist. He is always getting the shot. So a lot of these are Renan pictures. Does my clicker work? Okay, so this is us sailing in Alaska, and one of the first places we stopped was Prince of Wales Island, which is a really big island in southeast Alaska, but it happens to be where this woman, Marina Anderson, who's an indigenous activist and sort of member of the local tribe, was willing to spend some time to teach us a bit about the Tongass and the forest and the way of life. And so we spent a few days with her. This was on her front yard. Actually, I might not have taken this one, but I got a picture that's not as good as this one with my iPhone of the St. Bear. I was like, look at this guy. He was hanging out because we were filleting salmon and then throwing all the guts back into the ocean. And, lo and behold, it attracted bears. but that is kind of a good sample of the way of life on Prince of Wales and sort of the indigenous way of life more broadly. Sort of like, you collect food from the sea, food from the forest, and the nutrients all sort of return in a cycle. It's like the things you don't eat go back to the sea, brings back different life. It's like it's the way people have been doing it for 10,000 years there. This is her teaching us how to fillet fish. I don't even normally eat that much fish. I was like, oh, jeez. And this is Renan getting the shot. As I said, Renan is always making art. But I'll just click through these pretty quickly. This is Marina standing in a tiny little patch of old growth. And you could kind of tell the truly old trees by the beards of moss and the braids. It's like it looks like an ancient forest. And on this particular island, it had been something like 80% clear cut over the years. And it was interesting because to my untrained eye, I don't know much about forestry, and that was what was so educational about this trip, was that, to me, there are a lot of trees, But a lot of those trees had been clear cut 40 years ago, replanted, and now they're all sort of second growth forests, super dense. And so to the untrained eye, you're like, yeah, there's a lot of trees out there. But it's just nothing like the richness and the sort of the vibrancy of real old growth. And it's a completely different feel, as I found out, as you'll see in a minute, the bushwhacking into the actual mountains eventually. There's a huge difference between old growth, where there's big canopy, lots of shade beneath, fewer plants below. Basically, it's more open underneath and easier to travel, versus super dense second growth forest. But it was sort of an educational opportunity for us, and hopefully for people to eventually view the show, to kind of see a lot of things that to the untrained eye, you're like, look, it's nature, it's doing great. You're like, no, that is not a natural ecosystem, and it is not doing great. Like, it doesn't have the plants and animals that should live there. It's not providing the habitat that it should. It's just not as robust. You see these huge landslides in the second growth areas because they just don't have the same root structures. There's just a lot going on. It's just not as healthy as real old growth forest. This is us beginning the approach into the actual mountains. And it's funny, this kind of thing looks so idyllic, where you're like, oh, it's magical. It's like a magical Ewok forest. You're like going through logs. Turns out it was the most heinous travel of any of our lives. It was horrendous. We were averaging 2 hours per mile of travel, which is something like 6 times slower than you would normally walk through a forest. It was raining. We were wet. We were like crawling through thorn bushes. Oh, I think I have a picture of the. Does this? Yeah, the thorn bushes. It's called Devil's Club. The stalk has spines. The leaves have spines. It's a slight toxin. There are barbs everywhere, and it's like literally just bramble patches of Devil's Club, and you just wade through it for hours. It was terrible. Though miraculously, I managed to not get too many prickers in me, but some of the other folks were getting them through their pants, and so one of the guys was basically just sitting in his underwear with tweezers, pulling thorns out of his undercarriage for hours. It's all bad news. So the bushwhacking was not easy. And at times the bushwhacking turned vertical, where we basically were like climbing cliffs of this kind of stuff, and it's raining, and it's. I was wearing extra tough boots, like rubber boots, like you would on a fishing boat, because it keeps your feet kind of drier. But so it means that I'm climbing vertical mud, kicking steps in my extra toughs. I was sort of like, this is all getting pretty extreme. And fun fact that won't make it in the film, in case you guys ever see the film. So the woman, the story producer for the film, basically fell to her death down one of these cliffs, and miraculously stopped on this tiny little perch of land right before the rock cliff that would have gone down into this chasm of doom below, like to this river. It was like one of those things, she probably fell 30 or 40 feet, like sliding through the jungle, and then just miraculously stopped on something probably the size of this chair. and was all banged up and bruised and kind of traumatized. But had she gone any further, would have hit this rock slab that went straight to this raging river, and like for sure we never would have gotten to her again. And we were sort of like, whoa, we almost lost the story producer. But you're like, that's when you know it's a good story, when you almost lose the crew members. Yeah. We all were like, whoa, this is getting kind of real. Anyway, so this is us camping in the forest one of the days. We stayed in hammocks because obviously there's nothing flat. There's nowhere to camp. It was all... Actually, this is where I celebrated my birthday this year, in this hammock. We didn't make it to camp until 1 in the morning, and we didn't get to actual bed until like 3 in the morning, and I realized, I was like, this is my birthday. And I was like, this is a heck of a birthday. It was... But thankfully, that was the shore of this lake, and we got to pack raft across these lakes. It was sort of some of the fastest and most scenic travel that we got to do, heading into the mountains. This is as we started to enter the Alpine, and one of the first times that we finally had a view, because you pop out of this forest, and you're like, oh my God, there are rocks. Like you're like, sweet mercy, like we're going in the right direction. This is going to be okay. But we camped on the other side of that lake, and then the next day we went up and over a pass on the left side of the frame, and entered the actual Alpine area, and then traveled up this glacier. So you see the Devil's Thumb is the thing prominently in the center, and then the cool peaks on the left are something else called this needle. It's a different thing. But so we climbed the thing in the middle that's bigger. And we accessed this glacier from the right, and then sort of trekked up the glacier for quite a ways. So this is us approaching the actual peaks. You can see the Devil's Thumb is the big one. We did a traverse of the 4 summits below it. You can see they're called the Witch's Tits, like the Witch's Teats. I don't know. We never, because it was TV. We're like, do we call them the Witch's Tits? Like I don't think that can go on TV. But then every time we referred to them, we were like the Witch's Teats, or then we started just calling them the East and the West Witch. But then we're like, are we going to be the people to rebrand something that's been named for 50 years? I was like, I don't know. And we're like, I don't know what the sensitivities are around it, but they're probably just not going to appear in the show at all. We'll just see. But so we climbed all 4 of the summits, and then the Devil's Thumb. And obviously this trip took us several weeks, and we camped, and there was a lot going on. But this is the abridged version because it just gives a sense of what will eventually be in this TV show. But so here are a few photos from the summits. This is us doing the traverse. This is just kind of a highlight. This is the West Witch. Call it whatever you'd like. And you can see, some of the glacier that we trekked up to get there. And actually, the fact that you can't even see the ocean in the background gives you a sense of how freaking far we had to walk to get to these. People typically just take a helicopter, but because we had bicycled all the way from Colorado, we were kind of like, well, we're not going to take a helicopter for the last couple miles. So instead, we walked for freaking 5 days. These are the cat ears spires. And actually this summit, a couple of these summits, so as I said, Tommy had been recovering from a ruptured Achilles, and he's incredible. He's an incredible climber. He climbed all these things, but he's still sort of like not that stable on his one foot, and he refused to stand on a few of these summits because he was like, I'm going to fall to my death. There were summits like, again, about the size of the chair or something, maybe 2 of the chairs next to each other, and so you can stand on them and you're like, oh, this is pretty crazy, and it's like a 2,000-foot drop on either side, and you're like, we both thought it was maybe the most slender summit that we've ever been on in terms of like granite rock spires. We're like, this is pretty incredible. More. This is us coming off of the second cat ear spire trying to find the rappels. This is something that had been done once before over 4 days. Some friends of ours had done it, but they had 8 climbed. They'd spent 3 days on the climb. And then we did it in a day. We free climbed. We just did all slightly different style. But the fact that it's a very unpopular climbing area because it's so remote just meant that it was sort of adventurous. We had to find the anchors. We had to pioneer the way up and down a lot of these things. There's not a lot of information out there, so it was pretty exciting for us. And then this is another one of the summits, and that's the Devil's Thumb, the big wall next to us. That was kind of the main event. That's what we were there for. And then here are a few photos from just climbing on the face of the Devil's Thumb. Scenic Alaska, beautiful peaks. And more climbing. And then I think that's, I had one happy climbing picture. And actually, this is a kind of a funny story. Tommy, I led the upper part of the Devil's Thumb, and Tommy, there was like a big prominent thing that stuck out at the top of the wall. It's like a crazy overhanging wall with this giant black gash through it. that like kind of looked scary and sort of evil. And Tommy was like, "Let's go through the middle." And I was like, "Well, easy for you to say because you're not leading." Like I instinctively would have gone around it, either left or right, to find easier terrain because you're like, "Oh, you don't want to go right through the middle of the hardest looking thing if you don't have to." But in this case, the film crew set up. They got a helicopter out of the summit. They rappelled in, and they rappelled right down the middle of this thing. And they were all set up like, "Okay, let's do it." And I was kind of like, well, if I go around, it's going to take them forever to set back up. Or they'll just, so I was like, okay, if they're up there, I'll just go right through. And as it turns out, it totally worked. The climbing was great, and they got some cool pictures and cool video. So there you go. Sometimes you just have to go where the cameraman is, even if he has no idea what he's doing. It was, thankfully, the climbing was easy enough that you could handle that one way or another. But okay, so all that to say, that's the Devil's Thumb, another scenic shot of the traverse that we did. When we finished the climb, we descended off the mountain. We camped in the sort of col to the right, that snowy field. And then eventually we took a helicopter back out and flew home after 2 months away from home. So it was a nice way to sort of wrap up our trip. And we had successfully biked from Tommy's house to the Devil's Thumb, climbed the Devil's Thumb, and then headed home. So that's how I spent my summer. I'm curious how you guys spent your summer. No. But so I share some of that because to me that's sort of the public-facing side of being a professional climber, where if I'm going to be doing expeditions like this, it's nice to involve some of the environmental story in the films that we're doing. So in this case, talking about the Tongass, which Tommy had actually spent quite a bit of time and effort advocating for in the past. There's a lot of policy issues in Alaska around the roadless rule and trying to protect remaining old-growth forest, and it's complicated. And it's extra complicated because in that particular case, some of the indigenous groups had been amongst the biggest loggers, but then they're also amongst the biggest advocates protecting the forest. And so, it's like you wind up with people on both sides of it trying to find what the best way to sort of protect the land is. So it's a complicated issue, but it's nice to sort of highlight the value of the remaining old growth in the world. And so I felt like if we're doing some kind of TV show, you should at least be highlighting the important environmental issues that we face right now. I mean, obviously it's going to be entertaining. It's going to be epic rock climbing with cool aerial shots, and hopefully it'll be good. We'll see. We'll see what they do. But it could be great. But more importantly, I think that anybody that watches it will come away from it with some kind of respect for this place, this incredible landscape, and for these relatively fragile ecosystems. So that is my quick summer vacation summary. With that, I think I'm going to bring up Emily Teitsworth, who's the executive director of my foundation, and she's going to introduce the short film that we're going to watch. Though before she introduces the film, I'm just going to say, so the next film we're going to watch highlights some of the work that we've been supporting in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And it's a beautiful film. Really, it is the opposite side of the same coin as this kind of thing. It is not the rad aerial images, and it's not like high octane television. This is life in the Ecuadorian Amazon. This is beautiful. Let it unfold and just see what a totally different lifestyle is like, and see why it's important. See why it's so important for indigenous people to protect their own sovereignty and protect their own borders. I mean, this is as you'll see in the film, and then as we'll discuss in the panel afterward. But with that, Emily, you can talk a little bit about the work that HF is doing and the film. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Alex. Definitely a cooler summer vacation than I had. I don't know about you all, but it's really great to be here. My name's Emily. I'm the executive director of the Honnold Foundation, and feels kind of full circle being at the Explorers Club. When I was in college, my roommate found a taxidermied bear rug somewhere and put it in our living room, and we referred to that as the Explorers Club for the next 2 years. So sort of a full circle moment for me coming here, but really happy to be here and share a little bit of the work of the Honnold Foundation. As Alex mentioned, we really focus on partnering with indigenous and marginalized communities around the world. You'll hear from our partners from the Ecuadorian Amazon in a little bit, but we wanted to bring you this film, Our Children's River. It's a short film that really highlights the power of storytelling to share a perspective and a place, and to bring you into the lives of people who may be very different from you and your experiences. So the Honnold Foundation focuses on equitable access for solar energy, and why we focus on that is something that Alex has really been passionate about for a long time, but that's because solar can be a catalyst for so many kinds of conservation and development work. And so what you'll see in this film is the incredible work of the Guardia in Sinangoa, Ecuador, where they really use solar to as a tool to power their conservation, their sovereignty, and their land rights, and to protect their ancestral forest. And so I think this is just one example of the kind of work that the Honnold Foundation does. We provide grants and capacity building and lots of different support to these marginalized communities and organizations around the world. And storytelling is a means for us to bring in a broader community to that work and to highlight the perspectives, voices, and solutions of people who are living on the front lines of climate change, but might not necessarily have the networks or the ability to tell that story to the world. So really happy to preview this here tonight for you all. It's being released by Bloomberg tomorrow, and so I hope you'll watch it again and share it. And again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the film.
cartera documenty motorway ande andan saiki india hindi bajo to ya ke kanda makingi yang desngai te hi pa the hanya buat his ikut zona ke atsen di paku kama mungkin buat ya pasien saya betak ukun si hanya buat nepi sama hanya ini nya asyik hanya sebab ya warna mesumbupa di saat dia makannya hi pak kuata umbaninga sejani sak kecok lagi hingga sekolah makan ni sana kuirai hoya usia sehepa
nuestro territorio, ya que estaban unas concesiones mineras que iban a hacer actividad de minería de oro alrededor de 25 a 30 años. Era un peligro, un exterminio de nuestro río.
Estaba todo limpio.
Y nosotros tuvimos que accionar haciendo monitoreo, haciendo vigilancia, navegando en nuestro río para que no sea destruido. Y así nuestra guardia ha ido conociendo estas amenazas, conociendo qué actividad puede destruir nuestra felicidad.
Siempre desde mi niñez hay momentos que mi padre, mi madre cuentan, ¿no? La manera como han vivido ellos, que nunca solamente han vivido en Sinangue, sino que ellos han vivido en distintos lugares.
Había antes full cofanes en una montaña de atrás de la comunidad y que vivían mucho más cofanes por atrás también hasta el río Due.
Y nuestros antepasados, ellos nunca han sido así quietos, son así. Es así como ahorita estamos. Pero de todo eso, la colonización nos ha venido como cerrando.
Lo que una parte, por la rabia que tengo dentro del corazón, es porque el Estado declara como reserva y nos da como, ¿cómo se puede decir? Como que nos da un pedacito de tierra con un papel que se dice convenio. No hubiésemos preocupado proteger tal vez este río tenía que estar acabado. Porque date cuenta, desde que nos dimos cuenta cómo trabajaron ahí, avanzaron bastantísimo. Sí, como que sí hemos hecho un buen...
Estoy volando el dron para ver y a ver si hay algún movimiento, alguna actividad de minería. Aquí es lo que había la maquinaria. Todo que estuviera aquí, toda esta playa grande.
¿Cuántos hectáreas?
Como 15 hectáreas en 3 meses. Con 3 máquinas. Todo esto estaba concesionado, todas las montañas concesionadas, y esa era la preocupación de nosotros porque son partes altas y para nosotros ha podido no ser.
Los equipos tecnológicos son de mucho útil para nosotros en temas de cómo sacar evidencias, todo eso, ¿no? Volar el dron y se puede observar o ver más allá. Y a veces hacemos recorrido 2 o 3 días y regresamos a veces sin ninguna novedad. Pero uno se puede dejar instalada la cámara trampa, regresas a los 3 o 4 días, puedes ver las fotos ahí dentro de la cámara. Si es personas de otros lados, ya se puede observar y puedes hacer denuncias si es posible.
Se va todo abajo. Aunque nosotros aquí, como la palabra es muy importante, si no tuviéramos esta herramienta que era la cámara, el drone, GPS, todo, no tendríamos cómo pronunciarnos, cómo denunciar ante los jueces, ¿no?
Cambiannya itu kengkang saya pambil ya tayupi kuendan de cara angguas sa onika saya pangguas tunyo tapi stoy mas saya ma atutupa sa tunyo mas saya ha nyama maha huwa lisbek ka hen itu angguas atupa sama kandar curang ka tungwa kaya gua tia anga sampai mas sarpa mas nyoce sarpa mesiria mas itu hindi ko yan wala kan kukan.
Avanzamos de recorridos, tenemos como este punto donde podemos llegar a descansar y al mismo tiempo como recargar baterías, la que utilizamos, ¿no?
Antes tenemos que siempre a veces llevar las radios apagadas para que no se agote.
era medio complicado cuando no había luz, es como que solo con velas.
Los sistemas solares ayudan mucho, al menos en la noche. Si es momento de, como decía, de cocinar, se está ahí, se está riendo, y estás como más tiempo también, ¿no? Es como, tal vez hasta las 10 de la noche, 11. El río Aguarico es donde nosotros nos hemos criado desde niños, de irnos a bañar, de estar divirtiéndonos, ¿no? Cuando éramos niños no entendíamos la felicidad, pero ahora cuando somos mayores vemos a esos niños como un espejo que rechoca y se pasa a esos niños. Cuán importante ha sido la felicidad de compartir en el río, de compartir en nuestra naturaleza como somos nosotros vividores de estos territorios como pueblos indígenas. La Guardia influye en muchas cosas, de la parte organizativa, de la parte colaborativa aquí en la comunidad. Influye en vivir con la familia, influye también de llevarle la salud, influye tener el tiempo de trabajar para llevarle la comida a la familia hasta el último momento de vida. Lamentablemente, un compañero que ha sido parte de la Guardia padeció de una enfermedad muy grave. Fue la primera persona que me entregó una lanza, una fuerza de sabiduría, de conocimiento. Se fue dejando ese legado importante para seguir protegiendo a mis hijos, a los hijos de él, a los hijos que vengan. Tendré la oportunidad de enseñarles cuál es la importancia de proteger el territorio. Sabemos que algunos, pero no todos, le reconocen lo que hacemos nosotros. Por proteger lo único que les queda, la vida y el territorio.
Logan. Thank you, guys. So with that, I'm going to bring up some of our partners that will introduce themselves. We'll have a little panel discussion. I'll ask a few questions, talk about what we just watched, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So without further ado, let's bring up the panel. Does everybody have a microphone on their chair? And are we all? Yeah, get ready. It's gonna be, yeah, exactly. It's gonna be a thing. Okay. So actually, I'll just let you guys do self-introductions if you don't mind, because it's easier for me. But yeah, and Alex on the end is translating, but he'll get to that eventually. But so let's just go down the line. So Kate Trujillo from the Honnold Foundation.
Sounds good. Hi everyone. Nice to meet you. It is on. It's on, right? You all can hear me. Okay, sweet. Nice to meet you. My name is Kate Trujillo, and I am the Deputy Director at the Honnold Foundation. So I've been with the foundation for the past 4 years and have had the opportunity to see it grow from a newly incorporated 501c3 to where we're barely giving grants to being able to produce amazing things like this and work with awesome partners that we have here. So it's an honor to be here, and it's always amazing to speak next to and along with the amazing partners that we have.
I knew it wasn't on.
Do I need to do it again? Should I do that again?
You killed it.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
Hola. Mi nombre es Nemonten Nkimo, soy mujer Waorani de Amazonía del Ecuador y soy fundadora de Alianza Seibo.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nemonten Nkimo. I'm a Waorani woman from the Ecuadorian Amazon and a co-founder of Seibo Alliance. And I'll just carry on from there. My name is Alex Goff. I'm the development director at Amazon Frontlines. Amazon Frontlines is an organization that partners with indigenous peoples. We're very, very close partners with Seibo Alliance. Nemonte is actually really a co-founder of our organization as well. We live and work in the Ecuadorian Amazon and work in Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru, supporting indigenous struggles for self-determination and indigenous-led solutions. So a lot of what you saw in that film is the result of work that we do collectively with indigenous folks. But Nemonte is going to talk more about that. Tonight I'm really just here to translate for her.
So let's just start. Kate, can you talk a little bit about how this film got made?
Yeah, of course. So I know Emily touched on this a little bit earlier, but the Honnold Foundation, we work with communities around the world to support and uplift and really highlight the solutions, the community-based solutions that communities are coming up with in the face of climate change. And for us, that looks like using solar power as a tool for development, both with people and protection of the planet. And so we were lucky enough to be invited to the Sinanwe community, and we were there for 2 weeks. It was quite an adventure. Traveled really, really light. It was a coworker, Peter Wally, and I, and two film crew, and that was it. And so we were there for 2 weeks, and really we approached that trip with the same way that we approach our programming and our grant making, which is that we don't make the agenda. It is not our production, it's not our story to tell it. It is the story of our partners to tell. And so we went into this film, as we do with our partnerships with our partners, of not really having an agenda, having a really loose idea of what we're trying to do, and then really letting the partners and listening to them and let them take the steering wheel. And so that happened in this production, and the result was absolutely amazing. And really, I mean, I think for us, that's something that is trust-based filmmaking in the same way that it is leading our philanthropic partners. We trust them with everything that we do. And so we give them unrestricted grant funding so that they can uplift their own solutions that mean the most to them. And that, that tenet really carried through in the filmmaking that we did here.
Cool. So actually, speaking of the film and about storytelling more broadly, there was recently a referendum in Ecuador in which the people voted to ban oil extraction in the Yasuni National Park. And so, Nemonte, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about how storytelling influenced that decision and what that meant for Ecuador?
Pues Yasuní es un lugar de territorio Waorani ancestral de nosotros. Yasuní es un lugar, uno de la diversidad más grande del mundo, porque ahí existe mucha selva, muchos animales, de todo, y también para nosotros es lugar sagrado, porque nuestros ancestros guaraní vivían por miles de años y ellos se respetaban, y también hay dos grupos, son guaraní nuestro familiar que todavía no vive en contacto al mundo.
So first I want to start by telling you a little bit about what Yasuni Rainforest is for my people. It's our ancestral territory. It's one of the most biodiverse places in the world. It's an extensive primary forest filled with animal life, and it's a sacred place for our people. It's where our ancestors have lived, it's where our ancestors come from, and they took care of and protected this forest for thousands of years. It's also the home to family members of ours, to tribes that are living in voluntary isolation, to uncontacted tribes.
Pues hace poco año, 10 años, ya descubrieron en Yasuní un petróleo. Nosotros, para gente del mundo, dicen petróleo de la economía del país, pero para mi mujer, el petróleo es el sangre de nuestros ancestros, y eso es un lugar sagrado que debemos respetarla.
And about 10 years ago, the Ecuadorian government began extracting oil in the heart of Yasuni National Park. The Ecuadorian government speaks about oil as a driver of the economy of the country, but for our people, oil is the blood of our ancestors, and it's sacred.
Último, estos meses hubo una oportunidad para la sociedad ecuatoriana. Nosotros como pueblos indígenas estuvimos primero unidos, las comunidades, no solamente guaraní, toda la Amazonía del Ecuador, y luego empezamos a hacer una campaña grande, dar mensaje a las sociedades civil, al ecuatoriano, dar nuestro conocimiento, nuestro valor, qué significa la selva. Para nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, la selva es todo, la selva es vida.
And there arose an opportunity for the Ecuadorian people, the Ecuadorian public, to vote on whether or not oil extraction should continue in this forest. And so we united as indigenous peoples to launch a campaign. And our campaign was about bringing people together, and it was about telling the story of what this forest means to us as indigenous peoples, as the people who've lived there for thousands of years. Because for us, the forest is everything, it's life itself.
Entonces hicimos dos preguntas muy importantes. Dijimos, ¿quieren seguir protegiendo la selva que es vida? ¿O quieren dejar que destruyan y que maten la selva?
And so we posed two questions to Ecuadorians across the entire country. Will you vote to support life and the protection of this forest? Or will you vote for oil to continue? Will you vote for the destruction of this forest and our planet?
Entonces, eso era una campaña para mí era muy poderosa, la voz de los pueblos indígenas. Con esa campaña transmitimos el poder, y eso fue la unión con la sociedad civil ecuatoriana. También fue una esperanza para mí.
This campaign was a really, really important moment for us because it was about bringing our voice as indigenous peoples into the public space and making people understand what this forest means to us. And it was about creating unity between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples to show our strength, and it's really a demonstration that gives me a lot of hope.
Entonces, la mayoría de los ecuatorianos votaron 60% sí a la vida.
And in the end, 60% of Ecuadorians voted yes to life, to stop oil extraction in Yasuni.
Entonces eso significó una victoria. Para mí era un orgullo, de mucha emoción, de mucho llorar, diciendo que eso es un ejemplo. Esto es el ejemplo que vamos a decir, sí vamos a seguir existiendo en este mundo, viviendo mejor, porque mucho hablamos último de cambio climático. Si nosotros no actuamos, si nosotros no ponemos punto de tener esperanza de hacer cambio, ¿de qué estamos hablando en el futuro? ¿De qué estamos hablando de cambio climático? No hay solución. Entonces eso era un poder de que yo como nunca sentí que todo no indígena y con indígena unimos. La unión que podemos hacer, un cambio país, un cambio de buen vivir. Entonces yo vengo un mensaje trayendo de victoria que así podemos lograr. Si mientras no unimos, entonces yo pienso que mucho más allá en generación, ¿qué vamos a dejar para nuestros hijos, para vuestros hijos?
And this was a tremendous victory for us. It's a victory that fills me with pride, that I've cried many tears over, because it's an example of what happens when we come together. That people coming together, indigenous and non-indigenous, we can build a better future. We can build a future that benefits our children, that leaves something for our children. And this is ultimately what matters. If this isn't what we're working towards, then what are we doing? And this is ultimately what the message I want to bring to people who are concerned about climate change. If we don't do something, if we don't act together, we will lose this battle. But if we come together, we can win. We're strong enough. And so that's really what this story is about. It's about how unity can create change, that we can do it. Without unity, we won't succeed. But with unity, we can do anything.
Honestly, I feel like we should just wrap it up. That was something like Nemonte. That's incredible. Also, I want to acknowledge the superior language skills in this room than the the audience we were speaking in front of yesterday. So I'm like, oh, it turns out the Explorers Club is slightly better at this kind of thing. Because we spoke yesterday, and everyone's waiting for translation, and here apparently most people don't need it. So that's great. Okay, but so carrying on, a few more questions, and we'll open it up to the audience. I mean, this is sort of a broad question, but what is indigenous sovereignty, and how does that play into this? And if you don't mind indulging, how does energy access play into indigenous sovereignty? And to use jargony terms, but what does that actually mean?
Para mí energía es una herramienta. No es solución porque nosotros en Alianza Seibo tenemos diferentes estrategias que hemos trabajado mucho, que tengo experiencia con 4 nacionalidades de legal, de monitoreo y de muchas cosas, seguridad alimentaria. Seguridad alimentaria significa respetar a la madre tierra, tener esa conexión espiritual de no perder ese conocimiento de lo que dejaron nuestros ancestros.
To start with solar energy, to lead into what sovereignty is. For us, solar energy and access to energy is really a tool. It's not the solution in and of itself, but it's a tool that we can use as indigenous peoples to strengthen our sovereignty. At Seibo Alliance, we are an alliance of 4 indigenous nations, and we have come together to develop different strategies to protect our territories and way of life, from strategic litigation to supporting the Guardia that you saw in the film, protecting our lands, to working on our own food sovereignty, access to food in our own territories. These are strategies that help us stay strong in our own territories and make our own decisions, following the wisdom of our ancestors.
La energía es herramienta para poder cargar nuestros drones, cámara, porque nosotros tenemos un trabajo en la Amazonía. Ha sido muy importante herramienta para poder tener la evidencia. Eso ha sido nuestro estratégico de seguir mostrar al gobierno o empresas privadas, porque nosotros en nuestro territorio tenemos diario de una amenaza que llega a nuestro territorio. Tenemos amenaza de petróleo, minería, deforestación de madera. Entran las personas extrañas a matar animales para poder vender en la mercancía. Entonces, eso ha sido una herramienta que nos ayuda a tener a la familia de seguir trabajando y vivir en autonomía en nuestras comunidades.
Solar has been a really important tool in that struggle, because solar energy, as you saw in the film, one of the things it can do is allow our guardias, our land patrols, to charge up their drones, to charge up the tools that they use when they're deep in the territory, gathering evidence against illegal activities in the territory. Because our territories are under constant threat. And so it's important that we can gather evidence of these threats, from oil to mining, logging, poaching. It's a tool that's helping us strengthen our own autonomy and make our own decisions over what happens in our lands.
Y decirle que esa herramienta es importante para mostrar a la gente, al mundo. Pero para nosotros es muy diferente en realidad. Tenemos conexión con animal, tenemos conexión con la naturaleza. Si va a llover, nosotros ya sabemos que el pájaro canta. Si va a llegar alguien, soñamos y decimos, algo enemigo está entrando. Entonces, también hemos vinculado, no hemos dejado de utilizar solo tecnología, también nuestro propio conocimiento y valor ha sido muy importante.
And an important part of our sovereignty and our struggle is really telling the world how we as indigenous peoples live, how we see the world, and explaining our connection to the lands that we live in our territories. When it's going to rain, we know it's going to rain because we hear the bird that tells us that rain is coming. We dream and we know when someone's going to arrive into our community, and then that person arrives. We have this connection, and it's something that is common among indigenous peoples, and it's a part of our work to tell that story, to help the world understand that for us, we are deeply connected with the land around us.
Well, we appreciate you guys sharing the story. So one last question for Kate before we open it up. I kind of liked the idea of solar as a tool. It's not the solution, but it's a useful tool to aid communities in whatever their respective challenges might be. And so I wanted to hear if you have any other examples from projects we've been, I mean, obviously I have examples, but I want Kate to talk about them a little bit more eloquently. But some of the other projects that we've supported through the Hanal Foundation, and in what other ways communities have used solar as a tool like this, but just not exactly like this.
Not exactly the same thing. I mean, it's really amazing getting to work so closely with all of our partners on the ground and really hear the stories that are coming in every day. And I think one of the important things that Nemonte touched on is that, you know, solar is a tool, and it allows you and it allows communities to be able to develop and access the solutions that they see most needed in their communities, which means they can stay in those places longer. And for us, something that we continuously hear from our partners and something that we've seen through, end of project reports and through talking with a lot of our partners is that what has been developed and kind of the secondary and tertiary effects of the solar energy that we're talking about, so education, access to healthcare, access to clean food and to clean water, that has allowed communities to thrive in their place where they are. And to me, that, you know, talking about sovereignty, that's a huge piece of it. You can stay where you are, and that makes me think of one project in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon, that we've worked with, and we worked with them to install solar in their homes and solar in their community center. And prior to that installation, there were people fleeing their community because they didn't have access to the things that they needed to. So a lot of young people, especially, were leaving. After that solar installation, we got a call from them saying, hey, is there any chance you can help us support additional solar panels? Because people are staying and there's more need now. And so people want access to energy. And to me, that type of story is really important. And I think to me that also really points to the fact that I think, when we think about a problem so big as climate change and so looming, and when I see so many people here in this room, we all are approaching this from very different angles, and there is always something that all of us can contribute. And I think when we look at the landscape of philanthropy, only about 2% of philanthropic dollars are towards climate. And even less of that goes towards community level. And so the majority of climate investment happens at the really kind of high level, big tech investment. And that's really great and impactful. And it's not going to touch the people on the ground necessarily that are falling through the cracks every day and don't have access today. And so for us, that's the safety net that we're providing, and those are the communities that we're working with, are all of those people who might not be touched by those super high level investments. And I think the need is there. We have a pipeline of amazing projects. We've gotten in 2,500 applications over the last 3 years, and we've been able to fund between 50 and 60. And so the need and the demand is there of the people who are looking for solar solutions and being able to deploy them in their communities today.
Thanks, Kate. We just open it up to the room. Does anybody want to, do we have a mic floating, or just yell, just project? Yeah, you go first.
There is a mic floating. I saw it.
There's a mic. There's a mic. My bad. I just thought you should yell, but I was wrong.
Hi, does this work? Sweet. I guess this is a two-parter for Alex and Kate. Alex is someone who got into climbing quite organically as a career, just by climbing a lot and making a name for yourself in that, and transitioning at some point towards being the leader of an organization that has to deal with organizational type things like payroll and other nonprofit oriented things, legal, whatever. Was there a moment where you had to reevaluate your identity around your career and how you saw yourself as a part of the ecosystem and the natural places that you had a relationship to prior? And Kate,
should I answer that and then ask you follow-up?
Sure.
Yeah. So first off, thankfully, I'm not in charge of payroll and things like that. This is why Emily is running the organization. Kate is co-directing and running grants. I mean, there's a reason there's staff who are good at their jobs and can actually handle the day-to-day of what the Honnold Foundation does. But to answer the real point of your question, for me, actually, it hasn't really felt like a big transition per se. I would say that it's been a totally natural broadening of my interests and my care as I've sort of become an adult, I suppose. I think as an early 20-year-old living in a van by myself, super myopic, super focused on just climbing hard rocks, you know, that was my whole world. And unsurprisingly, as I've traveled, as I've gone on expeditions, as I've learned a lot more about the world, read a ton of nonfiction environmental books, and basically like learned about the places that I've visited, it's natural that I've started to care more about the world around me. And I think that as I've learned more, it's natural that I feel some obligation, like, you know, almost a moral obligation to do something useful in these places. And I think that the Honnold Foundation is very much what I found. I mean, you know, today's whole program is sort of a way of seeing two sides of that, where I can do it both through the specific climbing-focused programming, whatever you want to call it, like the cool, flashy things that I do, but also in the more meaningful things that actually do something useful in the world through the work of the foundation.
Heard. Thank you. And sort of same question to you, which is, how did your identity shift towards your career as you got involved with the Honnold Foundation? You have a background in a lot of indigenous stuff, and you've been a grant reviewer, and I imagine you've been a generalist in a past life. And what was it about the Honnold Foundation, other than maybe the notoriety of like working with Alex, that drew you to this specific cause? And how did drilling into a particular cause, as opposed to seeing a broad level overview of the industry as a whole, change how you felt about your life's work?
That's a really great question. You know, and I think for me, so I have a background in public health and broadly in increasing access to things like basic needs around the world. And as an Indigenous woman myself, I've worked with a lot of Indigenous communities, both in the U.S. and abroad. And so I think the evolution of working towards something like energy access, which is a basic need at this point, was very, very natural. And I think too, when we think about access to basic needs, things like food, water, and energy, all of those are highly dependent on the climate and on the environment. And so those two, you can't unlink those two things. And you know, the opportunity with the Honnold Foundation was really funny because it was one of those things. I mean, of course, I knew who Alex was. It's hard not to at this point, but yeah. So of course, I knew who Alex was, but it wasn't that necessarily that drew me to the foundation. It was really the fact that, you know, I think the opportunity to do something and create something really, really meaningful that is directly aimed at not only working with, but truly partnering with communities on the ground is really rare. You know, it's not always an opportunity that you get. And so I think to see that and be able to take part in it and really kind of shape the way that it's been created has been such a unique opportunity. And so when I think about identity shift and kind of identity trajectory, for me, it's all in the same, right? It very much is rooted in a desire to work with communities around the world who may or may not look and act like I do, access the things that not only will help them survive, but thrive in their places and the climate.
Other questions? Yeah. Oh, shizzle, it's a
That
lot
was
of
a lot.
questions.
I'm
We'll see what we get
terrified.
to.
Is it on? Hi, just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for this film, for helping finance it, for bringing it to us. This is actually a question for Alex Goff, and I don't know how to pronounce her name. Is it Kay? Yes.
Namonte. Nemonte.
Nemonte.
Nemonte. Okay. So
Sorry, it's a question for both of us?
yes,
Okay.
well, yeah, because your foundation and she's experiencing it. I've never seen, and I don't know how many people in this room are aware of the indigenous community guardians in these communities in the Amazon. We hear, everybody here knows about Donziger and the Chevron case, and how, these multinationals are actually quite violent. And the film makes it look like it was a very peaceful surveillance and investigation that led to exposing those 20 mines that were supposed to not be working there. So my question is this something that is sort of specific to Ecuador, that they were able to do this because Ecuador has the rights of nature law and has sort of set itself up as a pioneer in protecting nature, or whether there is sort of a multinational pushback there? And then, Alex, if you know anything about Peru and Colombia and the other parts of the Amazon where these, whether these guardians are actually also working. Thank you.
I'll take that one on. Thank you. So the film certainly looks peaceful. The pace is very slow, and life in indigenous communities can certainly be like that. What the film doesn't show, of course, is the violence behind these industries, the assassination of indigenous leaders and land defenders. Nemonte, in fact, has had her life threatened, has received death threats for her work, just to respond to that one part. And Ecuador might seem like a country with a great legal framework, framework that's very friendly towards indigenous rights and the rights of nature. But in reality, it's a highly extractive-oriented country. Oil is 60% of Ecuador's GDP. Ecuador is massively indebted to China on the order of millions and millions of barrels of oil. And so it's a country that is constantly pushing indigenous peoples, pushing into their territories. I should also mention 80% of all untapped oil reserves are in indigenous territories in Ecuador. So that is where the government is trying to go. That's where the companies are going. And that's why guardias exist, is to keep these territories and these communities safe. You mentioned Stephen Donziger. There's a story behind that of a massive public health crisis from Chevron Texaco dumping oil into these communities' rivers and streams over decades. And that's what communities are fighting against. So it's actually a very difficult place to be an indigenous land defender. Guardias, part of the training that we work together with Ceibon is conflict intervention, conflict management, field safety, because they're encountering armed miners, armed poachers, drug traffickers. So it's a very dangerous activity that they're engaged in. And the situation in Colombia and Peru is arguably worse for land defenders. The highest murder rates of environmental activists and indigenous leaders are in those two countries, somewhere tied with Brazil. The Philippines is catching up. So they're very, very difficult environments to do this work in. And these people these indigenous folks, the guardias that you're seeing, leaders like Nemonte, are risking their lives every single day to do this work.
Hey, my name is Marissa. I work in sustainable infrastructure financing for S2G Ventures and Builders Vision. I was curious as to your view on how the broader renewables community and market can be a better partner with indigenous and frontline stakeholders as they work through the development that is required for broader decarbonization to combat climate change.
So I can take that initially, and then I definitely want to make sure that Nemonte has space to speak to this, especially in doing the work and the leadership that she does. But I think from the Hanel Foundation lens, and something that we see really often is, one, invest in community-based solutions and work with people who are doing the work on the ground. I think that's really important. Like I said, the investment in this big bet technology is really, really important, and we need to kind of tackle this problem from both sides, right? We can't just invest in the technology. We also need to help the people that are falling through the cracks and who ultimately that technology is gonna touch. And so I would say that's definitely one part of this. And I think the other thing that is really important to remember, and thinking about, the question, or one of the things we're talking about with the idea around sovereignty, is that invest in indigenous peoples for indigenous peoples. Invest in people for their survival, and because they are people, and because they have the right to be there, and they've been there for a really long time, rather than going into it of, we're going to invest in you because you protect the forest. Because that is also extractive. And so really remembering, why are we doing this work? And I think that's one of the things that inspires me about Alex and really inspires me about working at the Honnold Foundation is it's about the people that we're working with, because otherwise, you know, why does this matter? So I want to make sure that Nemonte has time to speak to that as well, if you would like.
Though may I actually add that, yeah, we are people focused, though I personally have always sort of come from the environmental focus first, and the people always kind of came second to some extent. I mean, I started the Honnold Foundation caring about the environment, and then I would say it's through 10 years of doing this kind of work that I've come to care about the people and the communities more to some extent. And a lot of that I've sort of learned from the team and from conversations like this over the years. But I certainly started the foundation because I cared about nature, and have sort of realized that you do have to put people first if you care about nature. And so, you know, I mean, it's been kind of a long process for myself to learn that lesson as well. But, and I'd say I still like really care about nature. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, I spend my time in places like this. That said, you know, you just can't protect nature without people. And so ultimately you just have to center the communities that matter. Nemonte, yeah.
Yo tengo pregunta. Energía limpia tiene que abrir en todas las comunidades indígenas, porque los pueblos indígenas estamos protegiendo a la naturaleza, estamos primer fila de soluciones cambio climático, entonces eso sería energía limpia, es no solamente dar luz. Lo que yo quiero decir que con esa herramienta es muy importante seguir controlando con herramientas que podemos nosotros monitorear nuestro territorio.
How I would respond to that question is granting equal and open access to these technologies to indigenous and frontline communities. We are the ones defending these territories that are critical to our planet's climate. We're the first line of defense. You know, solar energy, as we talked about before, it's not just about providing light. It's about providing a tool that we can use in our fight and that can strengthen our fight to protect our territories.
I think we can do one more quick one.
Cool. Get it. Is anyone else?
Hi, thank you all for being on this panel and taking the time. I wanted to ask about the relationship between indigenous populations and the government, because from my understanding, at least from what I know, it seems like in a lot of Latin American countries, indigenous populations have had to really fight for their rights and protection. And I was wondering if the Honnold Foundation has had any run-ins with the government or any issues with trying to do your work.
I can answer the last part, and then I'm definitely get Alex and Nemonte are the experts in that realm. Luckily, we have not. We have not, you know, kind of had that run-in. That said, we support our partners through and through, and so we're here to stand by the work of our partners, kind of no matter what they run up against. So I will just put that out there. But luckily, we have not come up against that.
Eso, me gusta esa pregunta, porque nosotros con el Estado ecuatoriano, yo me he encabezado y hemos llevado contra el Estado ecuatoriano juicio y hemos ganado. Entonces, hay varias experiencias con el gobierno ecuatoriano. Yo veo que sí hemos ganado histórico primera vez una batalla en el año 2019, porque el Estado ecuatoriano quería meter bloque 22, estaba pronunciando al mundo que hay una oferta para que entre petrolera, pero sin consultar a nosotros. Y cuando entramos a ver mapa, nuestro trabajo era justo donde yo nazco y todo familia de vecinos, 22 comunidades. Entonces tomamos la decisión, si esperamos, si vamos a entregar en manos del Estado, nos va a dejar desastre en nuestro territorio, impactos ambientales, impactos sociales, y nos vamos a perder. Entonces hicimos, llamamos, unimos también con otros pueblos, hicimos una demanda, también hizo fallo histórico, pero yo veo que eso no fue solo victoria de los pueblos indígenas, de mi gente, pueblo guaraní, sino a todas las nacionalidades del Ecuador, que se puede consultar con el sentimiento. Eso estamos todavía en un proceso, no hemos descansado, todavía estamos de pie en lucha, porque sabemos que el Estado ecuatoriano, cada año que cambia el gobierno, va a venir con otra propuesta y nunca va a respetar a nuestro pueblo. Entonces, para nosotros es estar firmes, vigilantes, controlando nuestro territorio, porque el Estado ecuatoriano no va a garantizar. Sabemos muy bien. Entonces, para nosotros es entre los pueblos estar fuerte y cuidar entre nosotros. Por eso tenemos una estratégica que estamos trabajando con diferentes estratégicas en nuestro territorio.
Nemonte said, I really like that question because talking about kind of confrontations with the government, that's sort of what we do. We've actually brought the government to court on a number of occasions and we've won. We've beat the Ecuadorian government in court. One example is in 2009, the government tried to auction off my people's ancestral territory to oil companies. They opened up a big chunk of our territory, they called it Block 22, and they put it on auction for international oil companies to bid on. And when we looked at where the Block 22 was, we saw that it was right where my community is, right where my ancestral homeland is, without ever consulting with our people. And so we knew what that meant. We knew what oil companies coming into our territory would mean. And so we united, both between Waorani communities where we were going to be impacted, but also with indigenous peoples across the entire region. And we filed a lawsuit against the Ecuadorian government, and we won. And that lawsuit strengthened our right to free, prior, and informed consent, which is a really critical right for indigenous peoples, and it benefits indigenous peoples across the entire country. So really, through that case and through these lawsuits, we are strengthening our own rights as indigenous peoples. And we don't trust the government. We know that they're going to keep pushing into our territories, so we remain firm, we remain vigilant. Each new government represents a new threat, and so we have to stay strong, and as indigenous peoples, we have to take care of each other, and we have to remain united.
Okay, with that, just want to say thank you to the panelists, thank you to you guys for listening tonight, and I think that concludes our program, but we're happy to chat for as long as anybody's interested. So find anybody from the Hanel Foundation team, talk to Nemonte, since it seems like everybody speaks Spanish. Nice work. And yeah, it's pleasure having everybody today. Thank you guys for coming.